I spent about a month there doing mission work. It was very productive, and you'll see some of the reactions of the people. But by the end of the month, we had 98 baptisms by the end. And when you look at the baptisms, you'll notice that it's all Indian preachers that are doing the baptisms. One of the things that I'm real big on when I'm in the mission field, and Brother Bell that was with me, is that they let the natives do the baptizing. That way, when we leave, these people aren't equating their faith to the American preacher, because the American preacher is going to leave. And so we try to get them to understand that this isn't something you're doing to make me happy. It's something between you and your Savior. So that's why it's always a native. Brother Bell's been going to India, I think, in fact, beginning of this year, it was his 60th trip. In fact, part of the government of India actually threw him a celebration because he's been so many times. And so for the government of India to recognize what you're doing, especially when it's for the church, that was pretty amazing. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. 1 Timothy 2, 3, and 4. This is scripture, at mission printing and on this trip, and anytime. We need to be thinking about this, that don't pick and choose who we're sharing the truth with. God wants everyone to come to the full knowledge of the truth, no matter where they are in their station in life. I'll show you some of the country of India. This was one of the few hotel rooms we stayed in. You notice the number? The family that owned this hotel, they were Muslim. Well, and they purposely gave us this room number because they knew for a lot of Christians this number holds, symbolic meaning. And you'll notice the garland, the stuff over the door. When we first went into the room, that wasn't there. 15 minutes later, after we got unpacked, we come out, that's up there. And we asked our translators, which were preachers, we said, well, what is the deal with that stuff? He goes, well, he's marked the room. And I'm thinking like a target. And he says, well, he's marked it to let people know that you're Americans and you're Christians to stay away from your room. And one of the things then also that what got a little interesting is that they assumed every American had swine flu. Before I was allowed to get off of the airplane, and I was the only Caucasian on this airplane, so obviously, I'm going to get off the airplane. They don't let me off. I'm thinking, oh, that's not good. A doctor comes on with full mask. He starts scanning see if I have a temperature and poking and prodding. So then he signs off. They let me off the plane, but I can't get out of the terminal. I had to go through 6 other doctors, and they all had to sign off that I didn't have swine flu and I wasn't going to kill anybody. And I'm thinking, I've been on an airplane for 33 hours. The odds are I'm going to have a temperature just from the sheer stress of being on a plane that long. These are some of the buildings. This is actually the capital city of Chennai. So you see some of the conditions in which the people live and the buildings. Some of these pictures aren't as great. The resolution isn't. This building cracked me up. You're in the middle of the villages, in the jungle, and you're going along, and all of a sudden you've got a skyscraper, literally in the middle of nowhere. And there was 2 men standing out front of this building, just staring up at this building. Evidently, it was new. That had only been there a couple of months. This is the Bill Gates building. It's in the middle, literally in the middle of the jungle. It's the Bill Gates building. And 3 hours later, after we finished preaching this one location, we're coming back by it. The same 2 men are still staring at this building. Almost like they woke up, and in the middle of their path is this building, and they're trying to figure out, how do I get rid of this building, or how do I walk, But that just, sort of cracked me up. You notice motorcycles, the main mode, this billboard just absolutely cracked me up. I had to take a picture. You don't think of taking pictures of billboards, but I don't know. I had to take a picture of it. Of course, I'm laughing. The guy is funny enough, and then the fact that they have the Leaning Tower of Pisa behind him, which is in Italy, not India. I don't know what in the world that was all about. But that just cracked me up. And you'll notice the number of people. By next year, they said India will pass China in population for the first time. China will not be the most populated nation in the world. And you can see, it is literally packed, especially in the cities. This is what they call a taxi. It's basically a three-wheeled, glorified go-kart, really. And usually if somebody would pay for a ride for this, you would just then have people just jumping on because it's already been paid for. This had 14 people in it. I mean, literally, this is a tricycle. And on one occasion, we saw one, and we counted 21 people on this thing. And there were even some school kids on the way to school that had hopped the ride. And you can see one of the boys, he's sitting on the back, and he's falling asleep. I'm thinking, he's going to fall off right here in front of us. But this is how... And then bicycles are a big mode of transportation. They ride bicycles everywhere. This was one of the few indoor restrooms that we enjoyed. Well, Russell Bell that was with me is 6'3". This restroom is 4'1". He was a little cramped in that. But this is the kind of conditions. Most of the places we were in were jungle villages, very remote areas. They thought with my background and with his experience that it would be, we could reach more people that way versus staying in the big cities. I said a lot of American missionaries, when they come, they like to stay in the big cities, but they thought that we could reach more people if we were out. So you're going to see some of the living conditions. This was one of the few times that we had running water. This was where we actually bathed right there. That was the running water that we had. And this well, these are just everywhere. I mean, it's a huge opening, huge. Well, in the process, I'm right across this path preaching at a church that didn't even have a building. It's outside. There's about 200 people sitting there. I'm preaching. And there's this man, and I took this picture after the fact, but there's this man coming from this direction, about 80 to 83. He's riding a bicycle. Well, evidently, in the process of me preaching all these people, somebody behind him called his name. Well, he turned around to see who it was. He went in that well. I mean, we literally, right there in front of us, we stopped worship real quick and ran over there. Well, he's about 65 feet down. His bike is already sunk. It's gone. And he's treading water. I mean, this is an 80-year-old man. He's treading water. So we just start taking off our shirts. Some men were taking off their pants, and we're just tying everything together to get this guy out. And after about 30 minutes, we got him out. I mean, he was exhausted. And all right there, and then they pulled him up, and there's of course, no hospitals nearby. Everybody went back over to the worship and laid him on some chairs on the ground right there while I was preaching, and we continued on with worship. I mean, it's amazing. But I always use that illustration for, never look back in your faith. Always keep your eyes on the goal. You take your eyes off, you might fall down a deep well that you might not get out of. This was, in some areas, this was a better living situation. This is a concrete floor. This is actually in one of the orphanages. That's where they slept right there. And this would have been considered a good covered area for them. And then you see marketplaces all over the place. And this right here, you look at it, what do you think of when you see this? What does it, remind you of? Most people say it's a stable. 4 families lived right there. It's got 3 walls. It's got the palm leaves over the top. The front is just total open. This is where families lived, right there. And a lot of it reminded me of just growing up in Mexico, the same kind of environment and everything. This house right here, and the picture isn't clear, and I wished it was, so you could really see it. Well, on this day, the wind was blowing. Literally, the roof, if you really could see it, maybe later after I'm through, you can look at it on here. The roof is not flat in any way. It's waved. And when the wind started moving, the roof moves with the wind. And so they're inviting us in to eat with them. I'm thinking, okay, one, the food, by then it already made me nervous. And now the fact that the roof is moving, you don't want to be in a home that the roof moves. And so we ended up convincing them it's such a pretty day, so we ate outside. And the buses are a good main way of transportation also, and it's very cheap. The stuff there is a lot more affordable than it is here. when we arrived in Chennai, I preached 3 times that first day we landed after flying for, 30-something hours, preached 3 times. We got on this train, and we rode 18 hours north to remote areas. So we were on this thing for 18 hours. That was an experience in itself as well. Because while I was there, it was also the Independence Day for India. So there was all kinds of strange things that you saw. One of the things in India that amazed me, they have what they call their communist groups. They literally, it'll be a group of about 50 people. They travel with a communist flag. They're Indians, but they're communists. And they travel around, and one of the occasions, the train stopped, and a group of 50 of them get on this train, and they start throwing people off the train, the train officials. And I'm asking my translator that's sitting next to me, which by then I was lanching on to him for dear life, because I'm thinking, last thing I want to do is get separated from my translator. And I asked him, I said, brother, what are they doing? He goes, well, the communist group, they have the right to any seats on the train. They're throwing off people so they can sit down. Well, they started getting closer and closer to where I'm sitting. I'm very nervous. And my translator, he says, well, Brother Dollarhide, if I get thrown off, what are you planning on doing? I said, I'm jumping off with you. I'm not staying on here. I said, wherever you go, I'm going. And luckily, they stopped right in front of us, and the 2 men in front of us, they threw them off the train. At this point, the train is moving about 40 miles an hour. They're throwing these people off while the train's moving. Yeah, so it's a whole new... And then this one there's just cows everywhere. Literally everywhere. One time I'm in the middle of preaching in a village in the hut, and this bull starts to walk in. And in India, they cannot legally stop the direction of a cow. The cow has the decision to where it wants to go. You cannot detour a cow. So it started walking into this church building. The people had just started moving apart so it could walk wherever they wanted to. It gets about 2 feet in front of where I'm standing preaching, and it just starts making these horrible sounds. I'm very nervous. And I tell my translator, I said, every state you go in, there's 28 official languages in India. And my translator was fluent in 10 of them, plus English. I look at my translator, and I said, what language does this cow speak? And he goes, well, I don't know what language he understands. I said, well, you better find out, explain to him, I haven't eaten beef since I got here. And after a couple of minutes of me being very nervous, the cow just decided to walk back out, and the people moved back for it. But that was all the time. And they warned us that if you're in your vehicle and you hit a cow, they said, you need to get out and run fast. They said, do not stay in your vehicle, run, because if you hit a cow, and especially if you kill it, they are going to burn your car with you in it. They said, do not stay in your car. You run if you hit a cow. Because in the Hindu culture, the cow is held a lot higher than the human. So it gives a better perspective on some of these missionaries, what they're having to go through. My wife, she loved all the clothes. The men, usually white shirts was the normal thing, and, khakis. Women, you'll see theirs. It's just colorful. This is the most colors I've ever seen in my life. Very bright. A lot of these are preachers and their families in these. That lady right there the average life expectancy for a woman is like 44 years old. Well, that lady, she had been converted while I was there. She was 93 years old. That was amazing. She was a 93-year-old Hindu, and she was immersed, and she is still faithful. And then for some of you mothers, whenever you gripe about your kitchen being too small or cluttered, this is the kitchen's there. This is actually pictures, 4 different shots of where they actually prepared in some of the places our food. This one, there's an oil tanker up there, and then that's our food in that pot, and the guy just picked up a stick off the ground, and that's what he started stirring our food with. So that was an experience, and then some of these others as well. And it got to the point where I stopped, if there was meat on my plate, I stopped asking what it was. I thought I was going to go there and lose weight. I thought I was going to lose a lot of weight. Well, I wasn't anticipating, out of respect, if they offer you food, you got to eat it. Because it shows disrespect. And I did not anticipate every time we preached, the village was going to feed us. Well, there were times we were in up to 7 villages in a day. I was eating upwards of 7 meals a day. Well, every meal comes with a plate of rice. A lot of rice. So that alone, when water hits that, I mean, it's like instant pregnancy. I mean, you can just feel your stomach expanding. Well, if there was meat on my plate, and this is the reason I think the guy I was with claims to be a vegetarian, so he doesn't have to face this. On one occasion, I'm fixing to show you the picture, I had eaten my meal, but I noticed every time the cook turned her back to us, my translator, which is a native Indian, he kept taking the meat off out of his plate and putting it in his pocket. That's not good when the native is not eating the food. That's not a good sign. And so I got very curious what was going on, so I asked her, I said, what kind of meat is this? And before you ask me, no, I don't remember what it tasted like, because once she told me what it was, I forgot how it tasted. All I knew is it was bad after that. And I said, what was this? And through my translator, she's telling me. And she goes, well, when you were walking into the village, you were taking pictures at the big tree. And I said, yes. And she said, you were taking pictures of the bats? And I said, yes. She goes, there's less of them now. I look at my translator, and he's nodding and pointing at his pocket. Well, that's what I had just eaten. This is, right there. They are fox bats. They're the largest bats in the world. They stand up to about your knees. That's how big they are. These things were flying around, and I didn't know I was taking pictures of my food. These are huge. That's what she had just cooked for us, and I had just eaten. And my translator said, yeah, in the poorer jungle villages, they don't have a lot of food, so they eat what they can get. And he goes, but he's from the city. He doesn't eat that. I went, why didn't you say something? Well, I just thought that you needed to be cultured. And I said, how do you catch these? These are huge. When I was taking pictures, you can see their claws. They're so big. She calls these 3 little boys over to us from 6 to 9 years old. And she calls them over to us. She goes, well, at night when the bats go off to hunt, the boys climb up in the tree and they climb out to the edge of those limbs and they sit there and wait. And at dawn when the bats come back, the boys grab them and throw them in the bags. So these kids literally have scratches on their arms from these bats not wanting to go into these bags. I was amazed. I'll go back to this. These were chili peppers. They call them finger peppers. They put that in everything. The seasonings didn't bother me. Some of the people mentioned some of the stuff in Indian food. That stuff didn't bother me. That bothered me. I grew up in Mexico. I'm used to hot. Mexico has nothing on these people. That is the hottest stuff I've ever eaten in my life. We were still, when we were walking up, we were 3 acres away, and that was just the peppers he had picked. My eyes were already burning. It felt like people were spraying pepper spray in the air, and they put these things in your food. That is the hottest thing I've ever eaten. In fact, to this day, I'm still taking medicine that my doctor gave me. It literally seared my taste buds on the right side of my tongue. I can't taste anything on this side of my tongue at all. It totally seared. My tongue on this side is flat. There's no taste buds. That's how hot. When you're eating and you're starting to sweat and your skin burns, you know it's hot. And man, that was. They use a lot from nature. Their main plate, it's banana leaves. They raise the bananas are everywhere. Well, instead of, they want to use everything instead of wasting, well, they use the banana leaves as plates. And you'll see the rice I was talking about. And you'll notice most of them they use their hands to eat. They don't use utensils. So I was never so glad to get back on the airplane and get a plastic fork. But most of them will eat with their right hand. They'll mix it and eat with their right. Their left hand, they keep it aside because that's normally the one that they're shaking hands with and things like that. And then I show this to my wife when she complained about our washer and dryer, because this is how they wash and dry their clothes, right here. So any of you men that want to borrow this picture next time your wife is asking for a new washer and dryer, just let me know. This one was interesting. It's a statue of Abraham Lincoln. There are statues of Abraham Lincoln literally over the country of India. It is the strangest thing. And this they had just erected in Rajahmundry on Independence Day. And I'm standing there, and these Hindu people in the parliament, in the president's cabinet, are there at this dedication, erecting this new statue of Abraham Lincoln and Gandhi. You get off the train in Chennai, there's a statue of Gandhi, and there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln. My translator, which is a gospel preacher, and he runs preaching schools in India, his name is Abraham Lincoln. He was named after Abraham Lincoln. I was like, okay, this is crazy. Why in the world are there Abraham Lincoln statues? And this is our Abraham Lincoln. And they said that India viewed him as a freedom fighter, like Gandhi. And so they have statues of him everywhere. And I just thought that, and so my translator, that's why he was named Abraham Lincoln, because his parents always viewed him as a freedom fighter. This is one of the Hindu temples, and this is 5 of their idols, their gods. They have over 280 gods that they worship, and all with their own personality, and this is some of them at one of the temples by where I was preaching. And of course, again, this is an idol of a cow, and literally people were bringing up, and you can't see it as much in the picture, but they were actually laying food in front of this altar. And they said, you're not allowed to touch that food. You will be executed. They'll kill you on the spot if you touch that food. That belongs to that god. Well, in the process of taking this, and we were there for about 30 minutes talking to people and stuff, a homeless man literally dropped about 50 feet from us and died because of starvation. While we were standing there, he fell, and by the time we got over there, he was already dead. And they said that if he had grabbed that food, or if we had got that food to give to him, they would have killed us. And then they would have killed him. So when people are, going over there, some people, when they heard I was going there, they're thinking, oh, it's like a vacation. You're going to India. These are not vacations. And this is what the disciples, the apostles in the first century church were going through on a regular basis. And this is another billboard of some of the gods. When we were there, it was the birthday of this god, Ganesh. That's the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of strange things. I've been to 63 countries, and that was the strangest thing I've ever seen. He's got the head of an elephant and the body of a man with 4 arms. On his birthday, leading up to that, they make statues of him. They put these statues on wagons across the country. And on his birthday, all day, they take him riding around the countryside, I guess for a tour or something. And at the end of the day, they take him to a body of water, whether it be a lake, a river, or a creek, and they throw the statue in the water. And we saw this. And I'm thinking, they spent all these months making this. Why are they throwing it in the water? And they said, well, he's an angry god. He has a really bad temper, and the only way to quench his temper is to throw him in the water and let him drown. That's literally what they think is going on. Everywhere on that day, there were statues of him. I'm telling you, it's some... You can't really see it. Right here, you see these bags? These are hanging in a lot of villages, in remote villages. They're hanging from strings. They're bags. I started asking, the preachers what are those things? Because that's just strange. There's just elemental lower. There's bags hanging. Well, one of the gods that they worship is the god of fertility. Those are bags of afterbirth from women and cows to show that the fertility god had blessed those villages and that more babies were coming. That's what's hanging from these trees. Yeah, I quickly took that picture and I said, okay, hit the gas, let's go. I didn't want to hang around there. Our transportation that we had, this was my translator. This is his older brother that runs 2 preaching schools and runs 2 orphanages, and he's Brother Bell's translator. This is the vehicle that supporters had got him a number of years ago. I called it our hearse, because to me it looked like a hearse with the curtains. I said I felt like I was driving around in a hearse in that thing. This was some of the places that we stayed. This was one of the first huts that we stayed in. On this occasion, it got really interesting. we had just gotten in there, and it was 2 in the morning when I finished preaching. I'm just laying on the ground. I didn't even have a towel underneath me. I was so tired I didn't care. I'm laying there. Well, I'm starting to get settled down, and, my stomach's swelled from all the rice, can't move very well. All of a sudden, you hear loud screaming. I mean, loud. Stuff starts hitting the top of the hut. I'm thinking, oh, I'm dead right here. I'm dead. I'm accepting my fate. And then there's only one entrance to this hut, and it was just like a sheet over the entrance. Well, you start seeing shadows going around the hut. I mean, even though I've accepted the fate, I'm dead, I'm still scared to death. And I'm thinking, what in the world? Stuff's hitting the top. Well, and the only thing I have that's heavy enough is my Bible. So I've got my Bible. Whoever it is, I'm going to hit him at least once before I die. Well, all of a sudden, this curtain starts to slowly move in. In hops this monkey about this tall. And I don't know who was more scared, me or him, because his eyes were this big. And I'm white now, but I got really white. I scared me half to death. I froze. He froze. We're looking at each other. And then his teeth, I didn't realize monkeys had such big teeth. There's some big teeth. And I'm thinking, he's fixing to eat me. And I don't know if it was me or him, but he lets out this loud scream. Well, he screamed. I thought that meant he's fixing to eat me. So I turn and run the other way. But remember, I told you there's only one entrance. I hit the wall of that and fall back. And I was unconscious evidently for about 30 seconds. And for the next week, I had a red mark where I just hit the wall of that. And I wake up and I'm thinking, he's going to be eating my fingers or something. I said, what happened? He goes, evidently, when you knocked yourself out, it scared him and he left. And what they'd been throwing at us was cashews. These were cashew trees over the hut, and they were throwing these big cashews down at us. But see, that was one of the few cots that we had. In India, especially when they do it for a lot, but especially if you preach, they want to honor you because they feel that you have blessed them anytime you share the Word of God. So these are all literally fresh flowers. Luckily, I'm not allergic. Most of the garlands they give you are, like you maybe get in Hawaii, they come to there. Well, those are a lot longer. And, that's a lot of flowers and a lot of weight from even the waters. And then they gave us thing to hold, and then some of the people had made these tapestries also to put on us, to thank us for being there. Well, in the process of this, I look over at Brother Bell, because I just felt odd about the whole thing, and I said, I can't tell which one of us is the bride, because I'm standing there holding this bouquet, and you see, anytime you preach, they want to let people know that you're going to be preaching, so they'd even made billboards with our pictures and stuff that would be around India and stuff, because they wanted as many people to know what was going to be going on. And so these are some of those, and little boy we also honored some longtime preachers. The one that was sitting down, you notice they had real fun with my name. Yeah, Window, Dollarhide. Yeah, they were convinced my first name was Window. And so when I came back for the first 6 months at Keller and stuff, the Keller in our newsletter, they kept putting Window Dollarhide and stuff. They were just having a ball with that. But they were convinced my name was Window. Some villages, we had to start abbreviating my last name because the village we were in were very poor. Well, all they would hear was the word dollar. We would have sometimes 200 people following us thinking we were handing out money. So we had to start abbreviating my name and just put in Vendall D. Hyde. Instead of putting dollar. They'd hear the word dollar and they thought we were going to be handing out money at these gospel meetings. So we spoke at a lot of preachers' meetings, and usually like this one, there was over 800 preachers that came to this from around the country. Some of them rode bikes over 300 miles to come to this preachers' meeting that we were speaking at. This was a weird experience for me. They don't name children for about 2 months after they're born. And usually they will bring their children to somebody they feel that is honored and blessed to name their children. Well, after I got through preaching, this is at 1 o'clock in the morning, this couple, he's a Christian and his wife is still a Hindu. They brought their little child up to us to name the baby. And he walks over to me and it lets me know that I need to name their baby. I look at my translator, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? He goes, evidently name their baby. I said, well, what do you name the baby? He goes, well, since the dad's a Christian, I don't know, maybe pick a Bible name. Well, the first name that came to my mind was Elizabeth, because that's my wife's name. So they literally pulled out this tattered piece of paper and wrote Elizabeth Sue Lee on there. And so they named their daughter Soon Lee. But after, when we were fixing to leave, the dad, he comes over, my translator, and he says, brother, I'm very thankful it wasn't a boy, because I don't think we could have handled having a Vendall in India. And then these are some of the church buildings that you're seeing. And I mean, this is literally, that church didn't even have chairs. And that's why I was this way before, but I've gotten more so since being there and in these countries, that it doesn't matter what your building looks like. It doesn't matter how big it is. All that matters is that the faithful are gathering there and they're teaching the truth. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter anything else about that building, as long as the truth is being. Some of these, and you'll notice the custom, the cultural custom, if there's chairs, the men sit in the chairs, and then the women on the floor, and then the children in front of them. And then if there's enough chairs for some of the women to sit in also, the men sit on the left, the women sit on the right. When they gather together in a group setting, they don't mix. They one on the other. And so these are some of the churches where we preach. This was actually my translator, the one that was on the left. He had the honor after preach one night of baptizing his son, and that was real exciting for him. You'll notice a lot of these people that you see the pictures of are Hindus. We converted over 45 Hindus while we were there, and it's the most amazing thing. You'll see a picture later. When they're baptized, they come up out of the water, and the dot on their forehead is washing away. That's the most symbolic thing I've ever seen in my life, when they have that dot on their head, and when they come up out of the water, it's gone. I mean, it was emotional every time. I never got used to that. We spoke at a lot of gospel meetings that they would have, and like I said, in their culture, a lot of these people are traveling in some 100 miles. When you preach, they don't want an American-length sermon. They want anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours for you. And if you're with somebody else, then they want him to speak an hour and a half to 3 hours also. Well, some days we were at 5 to 7 villages in a day, so there were literally times we would get to sleep 1 or 2 hours, because on one occasion, in fact, we had spoke at 7 villages. I had preached straight for 21 hours. That was the most exhausting thing, and I've done a lot of exhausting things. That was the most exhausting. At the end of that, and I got to sleep for about 3 hours before we had to be at our next village. That was just, it was exhausting, but it was the most exhilarating thing, because every time there were people that they would come for either to be baptized or they wanted to study further with one of the other preachers there, and that was amazing. And, that's back to where maybe the old gospel meetings that we used to have in the church in the United States. When they would just go on and people would be touched by the gospel. This was one of the preaching schools, the Bible schools in Chennai. This school here has students from 61 countries in this preaching school right here. They all come from their native countries, whether it be the Philippines, New Zealand, Singapore, China, from all over the place. They come there to be educated for the 3 years. So they can be equipped to be preachers. The women, they want to be missionaries. They want to go back and teach in schools. So they come there. So they had asked me to speak. So I spoke for 3 hours, and then I didn't know they were going to open it up for a question and answer period that lasted 4 hours. So during this time, by now I'm at the end of 7 hours, and they've been asking me questions for 4 hours. My kneecaps hurt after that. But they're excited. Anytime they hear a gospel message, they get excited. You read one verse, they get excited. They want to ask you questions. What does it mean by this? Can you help me understand this better? And if you're going on to another village, do you know somebody in our village that can teach me better about what this verse means? These are some of the people that really touched me, and I'll quickly go through these. The little girl, her mom and her were in one of the worships that I was speaking at. And afterwards, she came up to me, and I started talking to her daughter. I got on the floor. She's special needs. She can't talk very well. She can't walk her own. She has about a 2-year-old brain capacity. So I was on the ground talking to her and, playing with her. And so her mom spoke a little English. She started asking me, she goes, well, we've never had a missionary talk to her. And so they thought it was odd. And I felt bad. It was a sad commentary on some of the other missionaries that they'd never talked to this little girl. And in India, a lot of times, if you're special needs, you're put aside. I mean, you don't get accepted into the main population a lot. Well, when she found out about my brothers and sisters being special needs and my mother being special needs, well, evidently it hit her. She leaves, and while we're still talking to other people, she comes back with her husband that's a Muslim. And he comes up to me and my translator, and through my translator, he's talking to me, and he starts asking me questions about my family. And he starts talking about his daughter. The next thing I know, he asked my translator if he can sit down and study the Bible with him. And 2.5 hours later, he was immersed into Christ. And it started, not necessarily because of me, but just me sitting down and talking to his daughter made a personal connection. And it went back to what I said in the worship time. It showed love. Not to show what I did, but the love that Christ has. That if we sometimes just take the time to talk to people, get to know them, even a little facet of their life, it shows them that we see them as special. Not as just a number on our baptistry, but special. And seeing this Muslim man being baptized, and he gets out, that man was excited. He was hugging everybody. He was a little nervous going back to the village that he was from because he was scared of the reprisals that he might get. But he was excited. He didn't care, really. And he was excited for his wife and his daughter. Because he said, starting today, now I get to come and worship with my wife and my daughter every time now. That's amazing. This is the young lady I talked about, Soon Lee. She's the one that graduated from the nursing college and that gave us her first paycheck to help reach the lost and to help the churches in the remote areas we were in. And this is a picture of me and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right there. And I said, Shadrach, older man, but I've never seen someone stronger. We parked at the bottom of this big hill. About a half mile up this hill is where we're staying at the hut. Well, I've got a suitcase, a 50-pound suitcase with clothes, and I've got a 50-pound suitcase with Bibles and tracts that I had brought to hand out on the trip. Well, I'm fixing to get out, start carrying these up. Oh, no. He was offended that I was going to... He goes, you carry your Bible. That's all you need to carry. He puts both my suitcases on his shoulders. Phew, up he goes. I'm halfway up the hill. He's already coming down to get the other preacher's suitcases. That's a strong man. He's a very strong man. And on one occasion, we had actually a person in front of us hit his brakes real hard to cause us to wreck into them. And he says, don't get out of the vehicle. So we, stay low. And he gets out. He's very quiet. He doesn't say a word. He walks up, and the man's coming out, and he's already yelling. As soon as he sees Shadrach, because Shadrach is so well respected in India, this guy's attitude changes. And Shadrach never says a word to this guy. This guy starts taking out his wallet, trying to hand him money to forget the whole thing. He starts, just almost like bowing, to him, apologizing for everything. And Shadrach, just waves him off and, waves for him to go back to his car. He gets in his car and he's gone. That's how well respected this guy is. And he's a member of the church, and this was Meshach. These are the wounds that I told you about. You see his chest? This is what they did to him because he was preaching the truth, preaching about Jesus in the village where it had never been preached before. They stuck the cable right there, and then they cut him up all over. And, of course, back then, in the late 60s, the medical staff, the hospitals weren't as great. So, of course, he scarred up anymore. They had to cut him in other places to repair the damage. But he's still preaching. This was the widows and orphans home that we got to be at for the dedication that Shadrach he and his wife had built. They also had members of the church make clothes for these women. Some of these women had been wearing the same dress, some of them for over 2 years, because they didn't even have enough funds, anything to even make themselves another dress or even to buy one. So some of the people had made them clothes so that they could have, and each lady got 5 new dresses that were handmade. This was one of the weddings that we preached at. This couple, their parents, both sides were both Christians, so they wanted us to preach at their wedding. And so again, I mean, it has the where'd he go? Chief guests, Brother Russell G. Bell and Brother Wendell Dollarhide. Even at the wedding, they were having fun with my name. But we each preached 2 hours at their wedding, because they said this is our chance to reach some of our people. Well, during this wedding, there it is in Telugu. They didn't know what to do with my name in Telugu. So, this couple, they were so well off, very financially. I mean, they're considered upper society. There was even a billboard announcing their wedding on that day. And you wonder why she looked so depressed on her wedding day. It was 118 degrees. There was no air in that building. It was an open air building. And you see how much clothes she has on. There's a reason why she sat on that day. She had to be. I'm sitting there before I even get up to speak, and there's puddles underneath my elbows from just sweating so much. But it was amazing. But during the wedding, I'm up there preaching, and all of a sudden you could feel the tension. There's probably 200 people inside, another 400 outside, standing, watching the wedding. And you can feel all of a sudden the tension halfway through my message. And I didn't know what was going on. All of a sudden, someone taps and says, just stop and don't say anything else. Well, that makes you nervous. Well, about this time, this large, very large, this guy, he was well over 300 pounds. He walks in, Hindu man. I mean, big red dot. He was wearing a robe, and he walks in. The 5 people behind him have machine guns. I'm thinking, okay, great, the monkey did get me, but now this guy's going to. Well, this guy was the minister of the health department. He was in the president's cabinet. And he had heard about this couple getting married, and basically they were stopping the wedding so he could do a photo op to show his presence at the wedding. So they stopped the wedding for 20 minutes so they could do a photo op with him and the bride and the groom. And then as they're doing pictures and he's standing there next to me, well, his bodyguard's standing this side with an AK-47. I've heard of shotgun weddings, but this is getting ridiculous. Next thing I know, this Hindu man turns around, picks me up off the feet, and hugs me and kisses me on both cheeks and thanks me for being there. You never know what God is going to do. So we start the wedding again. After they leave, we start the wedding again. 20 minutes later, they stop it again. A person in the opposing political party that's in the president's cabinet, I think it was the Minister of Finance, he heard about the other guy coming, so he shows up at the wedding to do a photo op. So they stopped the wedding for him and his bodyguards to come in. I said, I never knew what. This was one of the fishing villages that we were preaching in. No, that is not a dolphin. They call it a dolphin, but it's a fish, and you saw the teeth. As I'm preaching, and after I finished preaching, I was taking a picture of this boat. This isn't a large boat. There's 25 men on this boat. You see, there's not even room for them to sit down. And the waves are big. And I'm thinking, man, this is crazy. I'm sitting there taking pictures. Literally, as I take pictures, I start noticing that there's less of the front of the boat showing. I thought, well, maybe it's because the wave of the front. Over the process of about 6 minutes of me taking pictures, the boat sinks. It literally sinks. There was too many people on it. It sinks. About 2 minutes later, these 20-something guys are swimming over to shore and act like no big deal. And I asked the translator, I said, does this happen a lot? He goes, yeah, they usually have about 1 boat a day that will sink. He goes, usually they'll lose about 3 of the fishermen. I'm like, and this is okay? Well, as I'm preaching in this fishing village, a Hindu priest comes up and puts these idols right next to me. I mean, there's, the one of Ganesh and some of the other gods and these other idols. He puts these right next to me, thinking it was going to scare me or scare the 22. At the time, there were 22 people sitting there listening to me in the sand. He thought it was going to scare them off. Well, I'm used to ignoring stuff when I preach. So I ignored it. Well, evidently, because I didn't move, the people there didn't move. Well, that got other people's attention, and they found it curious that we just kept going on with our worship and ignored those idols. Well, by the end of 2.5 hours, there was 263 people sitting there in the sand. 13 people were baptized that day. I mean, it got to where we left. I mean, they were still baptizing people, but we had to already go on to the next village to preach. That's when God, that shows, and it reminds me again, God is opening doors. You think there's not a door, or you think in this case, with all this that, well, that door just got shut. God opens a bigger door, wider than before, and He adds the increase. See, we talk about India and all this, but this kind of stuff can happen here. We just have to get back to where we were, like I said in the worship, get up and stand up for the truth and remind people who we are and who our Savior is, and we can reach people. These are some of the baptisms that took place. Some of them, like in these couple, they actually had a concrete baptistry outside at one of the buildings. That was Abraham Lincoln and fixing to baptize his son. Some of the young ladies, and a lot of these, I said, were Hindus. That picture right there, he was, like I said, we were never involved in the baptisms, but on that occasion, one of the men he was baptizing was about 245 pounds. He had polio, which is very prominent in India. He was baptizing him. Well, my translator was doing the baptizing. He was too small to carry this guy into the water and baptize him, so he needed help. So I get into the water. I'm only in there at a minute tops with him to help him. My skin starts burning. I mean, literally burning. I get out, and that water had been so polluted, literally, everywhere the water had touched, I was red. I mean, red. I stayed red for about another week and a half. I mean, it got into my pores. It irritated my skin. And then I find out that this where we were, the preacher I was with, on one of his trips 2 years earlier, they were doing a baptism and a body come floating by. Because the suicide rate in India is real high with men. Well, right up from where we were, there was a bridge, and evidently that bridge is known for men jumping off and drowning themselves. And I'm thinking, well, if you told me that before, I probably wouldn't have gotten that water. So we also gave out, people in the States had given funds. The preachers, a lot of them, if they don't have bikes, they walk. And some of them, I never met one preacher that preached at one church. Most of them, on a Sunday, they're preaching at a minimum of 6 churches because there's not enough preachers to go around. So we had purchased some bicycles for some of them to whirl around to some of these churches. I mean, some of these preachers are basically working full-time with 6 to 10 congregations in different areas. We gave out Bibles and Bible study books and things to help the preachers. This guy's been preaching for 39 years. This was his first pulpit. He had never had anything to lay anything on when he was teaching. And so you would have thought that you just gave him $10 million. That was the happiest. I mean, this guy was ecstatic that he had a pulpit now. And quickly go through these, so I've gone long. These are a lot of the children. One of the things with my background and stuff, they thought that I could maybe reach the children and talk to them. We were in a lot of orphanages. One of the orphanages that we were in was actually named after the preacher I was with, Russell. It was named after his wife. He started it back in the 70s, and they have 89 children at that orphanage. And see the one child that was asleep, I even put the people to sleep there also. And the children, you see the smiles, and people think, it's that far away. But you look at these children, and they're the same as our children. And these pictures are all after lessons. They were excited. They even have posers. I mean, there she is, posing for pictures. But the kids were excited. On one occasion, we had finished preaching at 1:30 in the morning. Russell had just finished his lesson. I mean, we're exhausted. Adults start, walking out and stuff. The kids, there were 15 of them sat on the ground in front of us in the dirt. They walked up and asked me, well, can you do a lesson for just us now? For an hour and a half after that, starting at 1:30 in the morning, these 15 kids We just sat down, and them and me did a lesson. They were excited about hearing the Word of God. And this is the future of India. And we talk about the future of the church here. These are the kids that are future of the church in India. And some of them are very educated. The one boy you just saw sitting in the chair on the left, he speaks 4 languages fluently. I mean, very gifted. And some of these others, it was just really neat to see these children quick. Some of the orphanages that we were in. And they got real excited just knowing that, and you notice some of the kids still have the marks. When they go into these orphanages, they're run by the church. They don't make the kids convert. They do it just like we do our own children. It's a natural progression of them being exposed to the Word of God. And then eventually, they do see. This young man, and I'll close, this was at one of our lectures that we were doing. His parents are both Muslim. They told him he was not allowed to come into the building where we were preaching. He stood at that window, at those bars, for 6.5 hours. He's 10 years old. He stood in that spot right there while we preached that entire time. He never walked away. And when we walked outside, he walked up to us, and through our translator, he said, I obeyed my parents, but I also got to do what God wanted me to do at the same time. Because he said, I didn't disobey, I didn't come into the building, but I still got to listen to the Word of God. Both his parents are Muslim. Can you imagine, even as an adult, standing outside like him for 6.5 hours to listen to sermons? And this is a 10-year-old kid, and that kid never budged. I mean, that was amazing to me. Some of the kids in different areas, this kid, he was a ham. India is the only place in my life I've ever felt tall, because I'm not exactly a tall guy. I'm short, and as my 9-year-old says, I'm short and stout. But in India, I was actually tall. It felt nice. This school, this orphanage here, in India, if you go to public schools, you have to wear uniforms. Well, the kids at this orphanage, 89 of them, were not going to get to go to school because they didn't have uniforms. One of the ladies at Mission Printing is a member at the Crowley Church of Christ. She's come into money, but she has gas wells that, they found gas on her property. She gave enough money to have each child 2 tailor-made uniforms, and also gave them beds for the first time that they had never had. They have beds now. And we had enough money left over on the day that we gave them their uniforms and stuff. We went to a neighborhood market that was not too far away and bought each kid an ice cream cone. They had never had ice cream in their life. And I mean, every lick was just exciting for this group of kids. It was so neat seeing that. The kids work hard. This is the orphanage, and I show this to a lot of kids when I go out to churches, youth rallies. All this work here, they're doing it before they go to school in the morning. They wash their clothes, they help around the orphanage, and they're happy to do it because they're off the streets, they're in a safe environment. And they're always smiling. This young man went to a nearby village and he loaded up that cart with bricks that morning and brought them back to a man that was trying to build a home for some ladies. And he brought all the way back, 25 miles one way. So he went 50 miles with a load of bricks to help this man out before he went to school. And the children, played just like you see. There you go. See, I put them to sleep there too. But and I wanted just to do this presentation this morning just to show you, that these people are just like us. People think, this picture my daughter loves. My daughter colored a lot of pictures for the kids because she knew I was going to be at orphanages working with children. So my daughter colored, probably 300 coloring sheets for me to hand out to kids whenever I'd find kids. And you would have thought you had given them Picassos or something. And to this day, all those pictures are still hanging in the orphanage. And my 6-year-old daughter, she feels a part of them. And now she's become pen pals with 5 of the girls. My 6-year-old writes letters to them every other week, and they write letters back to her. So you see some of these, and this is This is the one I showed you from before. 93 years old. She's converted. She's working at the orphanage now. She's teaching the young ladies how to sew and how to develop so when they leave the orphanage, they can support themselves and their families. So I just wanted to show you all of those and the work, to let you know too, we can do that here. One of my best friends in Arlington, he's from India. He's here now helping some churches in Texas do mission work. He's from India. He's a convert from India. Now he's here doing mission work. It's a great commentary on him and the Indian Christians, but it also is a commentary on us here. Not necessarily Royse City specifically, but as a church as a whole, we've got to do better about reaching out. And too often we've accepted, some churches have accepted their fate. We're never going to grow. Well, that's given in to Satan. A Christian and a body of believers should never accept we're never going to grow. Because as long as we're breathing and we're still meeting together and we're still a body of believers, there's a chance that we're going to grow and we're going to add the numbers, because it's going to come from us sharing the truth, and God is going to take care of it, and the Lord is going to add the increase. So never give up, no matter how small you get. Some of the congregations we were in were 5 people, but they're still dedicated to the Lord, and that's how we need to be here. So I know time's up. If y'all have any questions or comments, or he's overwhelmed. He wants to say something, but he just doesn't know what.
One thing I was thinking of in particular was the singing. We've got American English concept when it comes to singing. I was just wondering what the congregational singing is like.
It's actually very similar. A few places there were songbooks, but generally, even the non-Christians, even the Hindus outside, if they came in, they knew the songs, because the Christians, they're always singing around the villages. I mean, you'd come down and you knew which ones were Christians. They're singing. Well, and that gets around, and they'd come into worship, and a man would get up there, but everybody would just start singing just like here. I mean, it was actually amazing.
A lot of it's by heart then?
Oh, yeah.
They know just a handful of songs?
They do, but they're also developing. They also are especially the younger, the kids are real big into learning new songs. We took them some songbooks that were in English on one side, and in this case Telugu on the other. And because, in fact, while we were there, we taught them Amazing Grace, and then our translator taught it to them in Telugu. And so that was really neat for them to hear Amazing Grace for the first time. And then afterwards they talked about what that really meant, what was said in the song. So, and one thing I did notice, that most places we were in, they don't sing the song just for the sake of singing it. They want to know what the song means. Just like a passage, they don't want to just sing the words. I mean, if they sang a song that they didn't know afterwards, they want to sit down with somebody and find out, okay, what does this mean? And and I think that's maybe a lesson from us, that we can get from them, is not only the verses in our sermon, but also in our songs. What are we singing?